All right, so we've got 3 chapters to go here. We've got 3 chapters left at the end, and they're all pretty brief. It's a pretty quick kind of movement from the end of chapter 15 to the end where we pick up. So this is not going to be a long video, but it is pretty important to have some of these connective threads all sort of tie into each other as we see here at the end. More on thoughts and ideas rather than the plot that's actually happening. So, chapter 16, when the Savage and Helmholtz muse about rewriting Shakespeare's plays, Mustafa Mond's answer is, well, you can't make tragedies without social instability. And so the words on the shield over the hatchery are community, identity, and stability. So in this chapter, much of the philosophy behind this new world is revealed with Mustafa Mond, who has become sort of the narrative position. Now, Mond admits that happiness is never grand. He says that one way of ensuring happiness is just, the idea is to keep the majority of the population, 8/9 of the population, at a mental level where they're always happy with what their places are in society and they do not desire more. The more sheep-like a person is, the easier he or she is to control. Now, if this is enhanced with psychological conditioning, then you can, according to Mond, create the perfect society. Now, Mond relishes his position, and the fact that he knows secrets that nobody else does, it shows that he may not even believe fully in this ideas that he's promoting. He may be using this idea of community stability, to enhance his own actual individuality, to make himself feel better than everybody. And this is typically what we call the role of privilege. In a society, the majority of people that are of one race or of one gender or whatever, in that focus that has the power. When we say majority, we mean like the power, the control. That's what we're really talking about, not necessarily the number, but that idea has the privilege, and they can take that privilege, and there are certain sort of benefits to that privilege that they come to take just as, oh, well, this is just the way things are. So Mond is really a good example of somebody who relishes his privilege. He's not at all as noble as he appears. He delights in the power he has to determine how society will live. Now, to say words like mother, father, to experience beauty, to send Bernard and Helmholtz into exile, to continue his experience with the savage. These are the things that bring him happiness. He's actually not as well into Soma either. Now, there's this sort of connection between him and a lot of the philosophies and thought processes, to some of the ideologies that are inclusive in these chapters. One is, of course, John Henry Cardinal Newman. From 1801 to 1890, he was an Anglican church clergyman who later converted to Catholicism. Now, he believed was not made for independence but belongs to God. Newman speaks of man sort of belonging to God. However, this idea has been adulterated or sort of prostituted to mean everyone belongs to everyone else. Mond says that God does not change, but civilization does. God has been replaced sort of by the good of society. So what we see here is Huxley trying to show this shift from God to society, but society is really represented sort of in the ideas of science within the book. Then, of course, you also have Karl Marx, if it hasn't been completely obvious by Bernard's last name being Marx. Karl Marx wrote, of course, religion is the opiate of the people, and Soma here has replaced religion and opium. As was seen in the previous chapters, the book My Life and Work by Art Ford has been designed to look like the Bible. The sign of the T was replaced by the sign of the cross. The rites of the solidarity group have replaced the rite of communion. Religion has not disappeared. It has been changed. It has been bastardized. The need for sacred rites has not changed, but the object of veneration has. No matter what, people need some sense of opiate, whether it's an opiate, shopping, food, religion, working, working out, laziness. It could be anything, video games. No matter what, there's probably something in life that is some form of opiate. Now, take take that with a grain of salt, because there are times where you need and to allow yourself to absolutely just veg out and chill and do whatever it is that you're needing to do. Um, I can't imagine a day going by without me having at least an hour or two where I can turn off thought processes and what I'm trying to, produce or create or consume or whatever. There's time where I just need to be, and that's understandable. That's not an opiate, okay? That may be a sort of relaxing habit or something like that. An opiate is something that we use to prevent us from thinking through something. It's a sort of a form of deliberate ignorance to help us negate something that may be wrong with the world, or something along that line. Now, another writing Mond uses is by Maine de Beren. It states that man ages and passions cool. So God emerges as from sort of behind this cloud. The answer to this is to keep people young, involved, immersed in sensual pleasures, and never alone. Then there's no time to contemplate the eternal. Science and machinery have become the god of this society. No one's allowed to suffer to be unhappy. So there's no need to call on the support of a higher power. It's the standards of society that sort of determine when a man will feel degraded and when he will feel happy, a time of situational ethics with no obstacles to overcome, no sort of self-denial to torture man. There's in fact no need for nobility or heroism. The dragons have all been slain, they're exiled. Horrible as it was, we have to ask, what is humanity ready to give up to never have war? So along this line, I think about, what do we give up to apply to have this sense? One example that I would like to communicate is the idea of academic thought processes, right? There's a huge, important need for academic dialogue, but to have a dialogue, you have to have people on opposing sides. Now, in the college process and in the collegiate process, there's this real important need for conversation, for discussion. And that discussion can't happen. And what's the point of it happening if anybody agrees? If everybody agrees. Now, the first thing that I try to teach as far as formal writing is that you have to create a thesis, a claim that must actually be able to be disagreed with, right? Now, I'm not talking about having an opinion like, oh, mint chocolate chip is my favorite ice cream, right? Obviously, you can't disagree with that because that's opinionated. We're talking about a primary thing, and sometimes you can take an easy primary thing and make it something very debatable. But in general, most people would agree, for example, hey, obesity is not healthy. So that's not really a huge claim. What would be a claim is taking the problem or the epidemic of obesity. First of all, maybe showing it's an epidemic. I don't think that's that difficult now, but showing the problem of obesity and how to actually go about in the most healthy process for a particular population of how to change it and create a new healthy person. That's what's really the debatable part here. So when you are in discussion with people, it's very important to allow the consideration of, honestly, viewpoints that you hate. A big piece of advice that I can throw you, that was thrown to me, of course, by one of my favorite professors when I was in college, is make sure you read, out of every 3 or 4 books that you read, one that you disagree with. I find it to still be a very, very important piece of advice, and one that I follow to this day. So think about that. Don't allow your feelings and your emotions to be hurt in dialogue. We tend to be, very quick to dislike and hate dialogue that we disagree with. But you have to ask yourself, why are you emotionally dissident to it? Why do you distance yourself in that way? And it's okay to distance yourself, but don't disassociate and not allow yourself to actually feel that process. I will tell you, I have definitely done that in my academic and in my personal life career at different times, had that problematic tension and remained ignorant when I really had an opportunity to learn. So take that for whatever grain of salt you can take that. So chemical calming, soma chemical purging, violent passion surrogate give man instant respite from all his pain and suffering. But at what price? Who determines what direction society will take? To achieve peace and contentment, should man put his life in the hands of, well, a few? The savage chooses not to lose control of his life, the right to be unhappy, to shed tears, to reach out and to touch life, even if some of it is ugly. He has rejected the creatures that he found in the brave new world. So this dialogue between Mond and Savage reveals really the replacement of religion and God by science. The chapter 16 discussion on happiness and sociability, you really can see that and remember that Huxley, during his life, isolated himself from society and withdrew into a sort of type of Hindu and Buddhistic contemplation. Since Mond will not grant exile to Savage, like Huxley, the Savage also must choose to exile himself. And that's a big question. At what point do we allow authoritarian control just to make things run well? And these are big questions that are asked. Should we allow the government to have huge powers, especially when, it's in a reactive position to something like 9/11 or to some sort of pandemic or something like that along that process? At what point do we say no and yes? And that's an ethical question that is worth talking about. And just because we are quick to jump on maybe one particular place doesn't mean that we shouldn't hear the dialogue of others. Now, unfortunately, our media lives on sensationalism for the most part, and it's hard to have that dialogue. But there are still places for that to happen. Hopefully, academics will continue to be that place. In the last meeting of Helmholtz, Bernard, and the Savage, it's one of a sense of loss, something the first two have truly never known. Yet the sense of loss makes them feel more human, and in that, there is this real sense of happiness. They do finally feel human emotions and understand that humans can be silent with each other because in that silence, there is still real sharing. The fact that Mond is willing to sacrifice the life of the savage for the sake of the scientific curiosity and propaganda shows that he's not as noble and self-sacrificing as he portrays himself. His discussions with the savage have convinced him that John is the grit in the oyster shell of his world, and that could cause this pearl of great price that Mond simply doesn't want. He's not willing to sell his world and his position of control for such a gem. However, exile, which would remove the savage from his control and execution, is absolutely out of the question. Mond must realize what the end will be because he knows John so well. All he has to do is sit back and wait. Then he can exploit the situation and show the world that his control is better, using John's suicide as a propaganda. One of the most important things about this scene, as Helmholtz and Bernard recognize the importance of silence and the importance of how that process is sharing, this really becomes true in life. Look at your conversations that you have with people. Look at the awkward silences that may happen. And is there a sense of comfort? And if there is, if you're okay and you're comfortable with those silences, there may be a greater sense of intimacy in that relationship, in that friendship than you have with others. So it's something that really is portrayed in human life, and it's done well. And it's kind of this neat resolution for Helmholtz and Bernard, even though it's obviously a bad place for them. Now, the self-flagellation of the savage echoes the actions of the group of flagellates who wander the medieval world, whipping themselves to atone for their sins and for the sins of the world. No matter which society he has been in, he has been denied any sort of rites of passage. he has had to initiate his own rites and methods of sacrifice. They've been a combination of the lore of the Pueblo and his mythology of the place. His purging and whipping are methods of penance, but the question is there true penance? Instead of unhappiness leading to happiness, his moments of happiness sort of take him into torment. Is that really penance at all? In fact, John has really become the new entertainment and curiosity. He's like the blind dancing bear in a street circus. The name of the Feely Corporation's photographer, Darwin du Bonaparte, obviously blends the author of The Theory of Evolution, Charles Darwin, with the man who wanted to be emperor of all of Europe, in the name of liberté, égalité, fraternité, all throughout the novel. Now, Aldous Huxley has used character names that obviously echo historical dictators and political revolutionaries: Marx, Benito, Darwin, Bonaparte. Now, though the young woman who steps from the helicopter is not identified as Lenina, from her actions and the reactions of the savage, it's very obvious that it's her. The man who deserts her to her fate is, of course, Henry Foster. The savage hurls his Shakespearean epithets at her, then begins his whipping. Once again, there is penance, but human desire overtakes penance and ends in orgy. He has been unable to rid himself of one of the most basic human urges. The only penance left is self-destruction. And it's sad to see how, and also interesting to see how consumeristically driven it becomes. That becomes one of the most famous feelies, that has ever existed. This idea of violence and sexual appetite all mixed up into one. And I think that is an extremely important commentary that is very important for our social world today. But anyway, this is this denouement, the unraveling of the plot, and perhaps the only possible outcome. Now, Mond has an example to hold up to his utopian society without creating a martyr. John's suicide is not only the destruction of the individual, but the individual to Huxley's view of utopia. In the first paragraph of the novel, the shield on the hatchery states community, identity, stability. Identity must come from community, not the individual, to preserve stability. And that's the end of the novel. This idea that what in John's mind might have been a sense of martyrdom really truly never is. It's never defeated. The big guys win out. And it leaves us with a sense, maybe a distaste in the mouth of the reader. And perhaps that's what it should do, as most dystopian and anti-utopian novels do. They tend to leave in a place that says it's time for you to think about the way you're living and to change. And I think we do. We do have this moment of, at least thinking as we're reading the novel, and afterwards sort of sit there in a sense of silence, maybe even a sense of intimacy, and thinking, yeah, this is not okay. This is something that I must preserve. And then we go through our lives and we have to ask questions about our identity and how do we fit in community? How do we interwork? How do we make the world a better place? Do we want to make the world a better place? Is the world worth saving? Is the world worth making better? Why do people disagree on the way to do that? These are some of the very, most shallow questions that come. But just because it's a really quick, thoughtful, question that's very surface layer, doesn't mean it's not important, and doesn't mean there's not a world of thought to be explored within them. So I hope you've enjoyed Brave New World. I hope it's set you up and ready to go in a new path of some sort of sense of challenge. Good luck, and may the 4th be with you.